In this video, we'll be looking at the Power Mac 9500. The 9500 was released June 19, 1995, discontinued February 17, 1997. It used the PowerPC 604 or 604E processor, running between 120 and 200 MHz. It had 16 megabytes of RAM installed. Though it has an interesting history, the 9500 is not necessarily considered a collectible Mac. Collectible Macs generally have something especially unique about them, like the oldest, or they were the most expensive, or they had the shortest production run, or they were the ugliest. Anyway, before we get started, let's go back in time and look at the origins of the 9500. No, this is too far back. Hell is this? Hey, that looks like me in the 70s. More specifically, March 14th, 1994, and the launch of the first PowerPC Macs.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and Chief Executive Officer, Apple Computer, Michael Spindler.
Good morning to everyone here today in this room, and to the thousands, tens of thousands connected via video link around the world, and welcome to the future.
By the start of 1995, the PowerPC transition was a proven success, and all three of the first generation PowerPC Macs received an upgrade to their PowerPC 601 processor. This was in addition to the oddball 8100-110, which appeared in late 94. It was a special design that was going for sheer clock speed. The 1995 upgrade gave impressive speed increases of at least 30%, leaving the original machines in the dust, increasing their advantage over Intel's Pentium processors. But how much of a premium was Apple charging customers for the PowerPC over the old 68K processors?
Well, how about nothing?
Huh?
Do you think they'll appreciate getting more power and more performance for less money?
Yes.
If so, you can tell them what Michael Spindler, Apple's president and CEO, said on March 14, 1994. Welcome to the future.
No, I'm not telling them that. Apple met their goal of selling 1 million PowerPC Macs in the first year. But the truth was, PowerPC was the one bright spot in an otherwise bleak outlook for Apple's future. Spindler and the Apple board were actively looking to sell Apple to a larger company, and a new Microsoft graphical interface called Windows 95 was close to launch, offering a more Macintosh-like experience. Market share was shrinking, and the Mac OS itself was showing its age. Steve Jobs, who left Apple 10 years earlier, was interviewed by Computer World April 20th, 1995. He sums up the situation for Apple at the time better than I ever could.
And so they had this wonderful thing that a lot of very brilliant people made called the Macintosh, and they got very greedy. And instead of following the original trajectory of the original vision, which was to make this thing an appliance and get this out there to as many people as possible, they went for profits, and they made outlandish profits for about 4 years. One of the most profitable companies in America for 4 years. And what that cost them was their future. Because what they should have been doing is making rational profits and going for market share, which is what we'd always tried to do. And Macintosh would have had a 33% market share right now, maybe even higher. Maybe it would have been Microsoft, but we'll never know. And now it's got a single-digit market share and falling. And there's no way to ever get that moment in time back. And the Macintosh will die in another few years. And it's really sad. Unless somebody pulls a rabbit out of a hat.
But with the success of the PowerPC transition, Apple was building on it with some other big moves to keep Apple afloat. In the fall of 1994, Apple had reluctantly decided to license the Mac OS to other hardware companies to help build market share. With the PowerPC's performance advantage over Intel's Pentium, Apple felt clones could grow the low-end and specialty markets. I'm just talking desktops. There would be no PowerBook clones. This internal Apple video by Dave Garr explains the Mac clone business better than I ever could. Okay, this isn't explaining macOS licensing as well as I thought. Apple did not engage any of the big PC OEMs. Instead, the first licensees were Radius, a company founded by members of the original Macintosh team who had been making video cards and monitors for years, and a new company named Power Computing. Also, about the same time, Apple teamed up again with IBM and Motorola to develop the Common Hardware Reference Platform, also known as CHIRP. The plan involved creating a generic PowerPC-based hardware design that could support multiple operating systems. This would result in a reduced cost to build and would make PowerPC a force against the growing Wintel alliance. At that point, the macOS would be openly licensed, allowing it to be installed on any CHIRP-compliant machine, not just the clones. Of course, success was based on the Intel x86 series being at a dead end, and for Apple it meant getting the macOS code off the motherboard and into the system software, which would not be easy, or a priority evidently. In 1993, Apple embarked on a much-needed, complete overhaul of the macOS in an effort to modernize its early 1980s foundation. Codename?
Copeland.
And planned to be called macOS 8 upon release. Copeland would be the macOS version for the CHIRP-compliant computers. So how did these three projects go? But in the short term, everyone was looking to the next generation PowerPC chip to really jumpstart the Macintosh. It was the PowerPC 604, which went into production December 1994. The first 604 machine, codenamed
Tsunami.
aka the Power Macintosh 9500, was unveiled June 19, 1995, with 120 MHz and 133 MHz chips. The 120 MHz, called the 9500-120, was priced at $4,699 US. The 133 MHz was called the 9500-132 for no apparent reason. Price $5,399, and this one doesn't even include a video card. The 604 would soon go head-to-head with Intel's P6 chip, later called the Pentium Pro. But the 604 chip was half the price and ran much cooler, giving Apple the advantage. Windows 95 launched shortly afterward on August 24, 1995. Oh, come on. Windows 95 was released August 24, 1995. The release was celebrated by PC users and Microsoft itself. The disc even included the full Buddy Holly music video by the pop rock band Weezer. Very cool, Microsoft. That may have been the last cool thing Microsoft ever did. Well, that's not cool. What music video came with the Mac OS? Oh, here's that Elf bowling game, if anyone remembers that. It became ridiculously popular when people started distributing it by email. This was before Windows users learned that you don't just open random exe files that show up in your email.
Damn! Is that all the balls you've got, Santa?
For the 9500, they took the 8100 mini tower case and stretched it a few inches to a full tower. Reason being to make room for 6 expansion slots instead of 3. It was still dwarfed by its namesake, the Quadra 950, which you can see here in a profile comparison. It beat the Power Mac 8100 in about every way. In addition, the 9500 outperformed any 68K Mac at running 68K apps, even though it was running that code in emulation. That's fast. Yet the sheer amount of 68K code still in the macOS and the aging design of the macOS itself was holding back the potential speed of the 604 chip. The OS at the time of the 9500's release was System 7.51. That's where we saw a change in the startup screen. This was to accommodate the clones, as they were not allowed to be called Macintosh. They also added the starting up text because some users thought the progress bar in 7.5 meant it was rebuilding the desktop. But the 9500 came with System 7.52, a new version which supported all the changes needed for the new motherboard. It had a new and improved 68K emulator. It also bumped up the maximum volume size it could mount from 4 gigabytes to a mind-boggling 2,000 gigabytes. That's 2 terabytes, folks. Yeah, whatever. It was impressive at the time. This version was only available for the 9500, and owners of older Macs felt that they were being left in the cold. Yeah, well, it's not for you. 6 months later, Apple released 7.53, available to all existing Mac users as System 7.5 Update 2. Same as 7.51, which was Update 1. Users of 7.52 were urged to install Update 2, but many thought they already had it because their version ended in 2. Worse, to fix some bugs, Apple then released a minor update, which they called 7.53 Revision 2, which was nothing like Update 2 or 7.52.
You're confusing me.
Regardless, eventually System 7.55 would come and finally serve as a stable reference release, but marking the end of the road for a lot of early Macs. Yeah, time for a new computer anyway. For the first time, the CPU was not on the motherboard, it was on a daughter card that plugged into the motherboard. This made processor replacement and upgrades much easier. In fact, years later you could upgrade with a G3 or G4 card from third-party companies, making the 9500 the oldest Mac that could run OS X. Yeah, that doesn't count. The other big change was the switch in the expansion card bus from the 10 MHz new bus to Intel's 33 MHz PCI bus, which was becoming an industry standard. It meant less expensive peripheral boards because PCI could already be found on virtually all systems with Intel's Pentium processor. However, for Apple to convert from new bus to PCI was quite a technical feat, and required a team at Apple to make it happen. The codename of the PCI Mac was
Powersurge. Enough with the code names.
You can call up an Easter egg by typing secret about box in simple text and dragging it to the desktop. The flag features the iguana mascot for System 7.52 flying over the Apple campus. The wind direction is controlled by the position of the pointer. Okay, as fun as this is, on the 9500's motherboard there were actually 2 PCI buses, 3 slots per bus, with a bridge controller chip for each bus. The 9500 had 12 RAM slots, using a new RAM standard. With the first generation Power Macs, you used 72-pin, 32-bit SIMs, but since the PowerPC chips have a 64-bit data path, SIMs had to be added in identical pairs to match the bandwidth. The 9500 used new dual inline memory modules, DIMMs, 168-pin, 64-bit cards, 84 pins on front, 84 on back. So you don't have to add in identical pairs anymore, but if you do, it uses memory interleaving to create a 128-bit wide memory bus, increasing speed significantly. You would install RAM starting with A6, and for memory interleaving, install an identical one in B6, then work backwards to slot 1. With 12 slots, in theory, you could buy 12 64 meg DIMMs to get 768 megabytes of RAM. Of course, that would cost you upward of $25,000 at the time. Once 128 megabyte DIMMs were available, it became the first Mac that could hit the RAM ceiling of the Mac OS, which was 1.5 gigabytes. And this RAM you could press directly into the slot. You didn't have to angle the board in and then straighten it to lock like previous Macs. The 4 megabyte ROM was soldered to the motherboard, but there was also a slot for a ROM sim, should it have been needed. I never heard there ever was. Where 601 machines had that 256K level 2 cache card that could be installed, a 512K cache is soldered to the motherboard here, and it had a 128-bit wide data path, making it much faster than the 601s. Later, Apple discovered that being stuck at 512K was a bit limiting, so newer second-generation designs went back to the cache card slot. It came with both the custom AAUI port for Ethernet and a new addition, an actual 10-base-T connector, allowing anyone with this Ethernet cabling to connect directly without needing a dumb AAUI transceiver. There were 3 peripheral bays, one being for CD-ROM, which was standard by this time, a tray-loader quad-speed CD-ROM called the 600i. Later models came with the 8X drive, originally called the 1200i, until Apple got tired of that naming convention. While it included the mouse and plain talk microphone, you still had to buy the keyboard separately. In April 1996, almost a year after the 9500 was released, they replaced both models with a 150 MHz version. When the highly optimized 604E became available, Apple replaced the 150 MHz with 604E models, a 180 MHz dual processor, and a 200 MHz model. That was August 1996, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back. No. The 9500 was about as far from a consumer-level computer as you could get. Users needing this level of machine were not going to use lame motherboard video, so they just left it out altogether. If you didn't have a professional PCI video card in mind, you'd get the general-purpose Apple Accelerated Graphics card pre-installed. The cost of this video card as an add-on was $700. It has 2 MB of VRAM, expandable to 4 MB, 4 MB kind of being the minimum needed to start working with full motion video. The card itself was an ATI Mach 64. You certainly wouldn't buy a 9500 just to play Marathon 2, released December 1995. Marathon 2 didn't have the same rich atmosphere as the first game, but made up for it in strong gameplay and replay value. This is like the situation Apple had gotten itself into at the end of 1995. They were battling macOS clones on one side and Wintel on the other. Apple was now charging the clones licensing fees 4 times higher than what Microsoft was charging for Windows 95. Still, Apple was not making money with the clone strategy, and the clones were not growing market share. The macOS market share actually shrank during the clone period. The clones were mostly only cannibalizing Apple's most profitable high-end computer sales, plus clones consistently outperformed the Macintosh in critics' reviews. To be fair, most of the clone makers were advancing the cause. Clone maker Daystar Digital pioneered multiprocessing, and Apple licensed the technology from them to build the first ever multiprocessor Mac. Daystar would only let them license dual processor cards. Daystar kept the quad processor cards to themselves. When the G3 chips hit the scene in November 1997, multiprocessor Macs died off because the G3 was not built to support multiprocessing. Plus the G3 was already plenty fast on its own. But then there was Power Computing, who came in aggressively with a lot of energy and good ideas.
We're driving the price of Mac OS systems down by using proven PC technology and cases and power supplies.
Power Computing took the latest PowerPC chips and brought them to market well ahead of Apple, and with better prices, and giving buyers the whole package.
And the keyboard.
I don't have to pay extra for the keyboard.
No, you don't have to pay extra for the keyboard.
Isn't competition wonderful?
Meanwhile, Spindler consistently miscalculated product development and manufacturing schedules, as well as customer demand. With the World Wide Web catching on and computer ownership being more practical for business and home, there was a sudden growth in personal computers, which of course led to an industry part shortage. Spindler decided to use those limited resources to build low-end, low-profit consumer performas, which it turned out no one wanted. All the demand was for the high-end machines. The result was that it was almost as hard to find a 9500 for sale then as it is now. By February 1996, Apple's board had had enough of Spindler and replaced him with Gil Amelio, a member of Apple's board who was very vocal about saving Apple rather than selling it.
The essence of our plan is simple. We're going back to our roots. Easy to say, but challenging to implement. Almost uniquely, we are the company that takes complex technology and makes it simple and easy to use. It's pretty clear we must simplify our lineup of products while differentiating them through innovation.
Yeah, you got rid of those pretty quick. After years of trying to find a 9500, I recently acquired the multi-processor model. Good shape on the outside, but it won't boot up. It gives a chime, but no video. So let's open it up. The captive screws look cheaper than our old friend the Quadra 800. And instead of 4 screws, there's 6 on this taller case. Okay, lift the cover off and set it aside. Ugh. Looks like that footage of the Titanic wreck. Even compared to what I've seen in the past, these are some major dust bunnies. Best to blow out the dust outside. You don't know what contaminants these have been sucking in all these years. Wear a dust mask too if you have one. First we take out this fan. This fan also functioned to help hold the PCI cards in place. I'll remove the fan from the enclosure and give it a clean. I'll pull the hard drive, typically a 2 GB in these machines. Considering the 6100 I bought the year before came with a 350 megabyte hard drive, 2 GB was plenty big. I'll just plug the hard drive into my 6100 to see if it's the problem. Okay, hard drive works. It has 8.6 installed. Applications, Microsoft Word 6, Adobe Illustrator 8, Kid Pics.
Have a great summer vacation and don't be late for school next year. Remember to dress warmly in the winter. Bye-bye.
Yeah, that system alert sound will get tired really quick. And Microsoft Outlook. They left their email box on here. To protect the previous owner, I'd better wipe it. Looks like some pretty important business dealings. Wow. What was his response? What kind of business dealing is this? It's easy to remove the dual processor daughter card. We can see Daystar's name on it, and that there's 2 chips which are interconnected. Removing the PCI cards is another matter. They're held in place by these plastic clips that you have to push aside to release the card. That was a design problem with the new PCI slots. Because they aren't secured by screws, the cards could jostle loose when moving the machine. This unit contained 2 video cards, the standard Apple card that I talked about, and the second was a user-added card, a long 12-inch radius ThunderPower PCI video card, a $2,000 card in its day. One positive change they made compared to the Quadra 800, they've put all the connectors on the top, so you don't have to fish around inside trying to disconnect cables. Still, this was one of Apple's worst designs as far as disassembly. It's basically an over-engineered 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, and you have to disassemble it to the point that you can remove the motherboard, just add RAM, or change the battery. There's so many plastic latches, which makes it even more challenging given that the ABS plastic gets more brittle after 20 years. If you're faced with doing this, I suggest using a hairdryer on the clips to soften the plastic before you go at them. Just watch you don't heat it to the point where it deforms or goes molten. If something does break, like when I tried to remove the power button without the hairdryer, have ABS plumbing cement on hand to glue them back together. And finally, there it is. There's the 9500 motherboard. Ugh, gross. Speaking of the battery, let's check it. This voltmeter will tell me if I'm at 3.6 volts. Now, I'll settle for 3.0 volts, but not lower than that. Now, let's see. Okay, I've torn it down to the bare bones. You can see it's the Power Mac 8100 frame with a spacer added to the bottom to allow the taller case. And they used black fiber reinforced plastic for the frame. I guess I wasn't the only one finding the plastic brittle. This machine is not a good candidate for retrobrite treatment because the tin shielding is welded to the plastic frame. If the peroxide touches the tin, it will rust like crazy. Best to leave it alone. Now that I've cleaned it and reseated all the cards, let's see if it will work. No. Okay, time to run down the troubleshooting checklist. Okay, let's try an alternate processor card. No, that didn't work. Reset the CUDA chip. Reset the logic board. Which leaves us painstakingly testing the RAM one pair at a time. But this test was successful. The two sets of 64 megabyte DIMMs work, but the 16 megabyte pair does not. So it was bad RAM.
Have a great summer vacation and don't be late for school next year. Damn!
Software issues aside, at least it runs. By 1996, in the clone arena, there was still Power Computing, but Radius's clone business was sold to UMax, who made the Super Mac line. There was Motorola's Star Max, Daystar, and I don't even know who that is. The number of clones available was overwhelming, and most were rated better than Apple's offerings, making it hard to justify buying a Macintosh, except maybe brand loyalty. But proponents of cloning still believed Apple would be better off in the long run, because the clones would teach Apple some lessons on how to compete in the broader PC market. And Copeland? This is an automated demo of Copeland showing what it could have looked like if it actually worked. On the Computer Chronicles, an Apple representative used it to fake a demonstration of Copeland in November 1995.
All right, you've got a lot of stuff to show us, so I want to just let you roll and show us as many of the new features of Copeland as you can now.
Okay, thanks. First of all, one of the things we recognize is there's a lot that people would like to do with a Macintosh today. They want to be able to make multiple copies, they want to be able to empty the trash, they even want to be able to open an application and have that all happen simultaneously.
So you were doing three things at once there.
Right.
The new Mac OS due out in 1996 sometime.
Yes, that's right.
Apple delayed it, developing Harmony instead, also known as Mac OS 7.6. Meanwhile, Emilio took stock of Copeland. It was just a mess. A bunch of cool ideas that would never work together. So he canned it. Now, many of the more developed features would be scavenged for what became the real Mac OS 8, but other Copeland concepts like protected memory, preemptive multitasking, and extreme desktop customizations never came to be. Customizations like this techno theme, or this theme that may have been the influence for Windows XP. Emilio began to look outside of Apple for another operating system they could use. He ended up buying Steve Jobs' failing company Next to get their OS, with a plan to turn it into what should have been Copeland.
And after I think a very, very professional evaluation, the Next technology came out as the clear winner by 50% or so in terms of all the things that we felt were important. What are the gains? Well, you're going to get an OS that's ahead of its time, and it's a good fit and complementary to our technology. And of course, along with the application, we also got this guy named Steve Jobs.
Steve came back to Apple in January 1997 as an advisor. At the same time, macOS 7.6 was released. Just a month later, in February 1997, the 9600 replaced the 9500, a beautiful and powerful looking design, and finally featured a very easy to open case. During the life of the Power Mac 9500, we saw the beginnings of change at Apple, which would bring it back from certain death. Who knows what the future would hold from here?
Elf Bowling, the movie.
Welcome to the future.
Look at the way PowerPC keeps getting faster. What can Intel say? They're stuck with CISC, and so we're licensing as fast as we can, trying to obey that Spindler plan. Meeting with OEMs into the night, and then we whisper words like Gates and Grove, and they take out their wallet, and I say, I think we're a clone now. There doesn't seem to be Jean-Louis around. I think we're a clone now. The Power Macintosh has the benchmark crown. I think we're a clone now. The heat from Pentium